Howdy, my name is Zachary Bankson.
I'm Michelle Grumman.
Howdy, I'm Austin Ross.
We're Team 6, and we're presenting about an elderberry processing plant in Guatemala. Our presentation agenda is our risk assessment, which will include an assessment of financial risk and physical safety of the workforce and the consumers that will be potentially buying our product. After that, we will cover our implementation plan, which is going to talk about the actual implementation of the system we're proposing, and a project schedule listing how long each part of the implementation will take. From here, I'll pass it on to Carly, and she'll go over the first set of risks.
Thanks, Zach. So I'm going to be discussing the first risk, which is related to the finances of the project. So as we've discussed, this is the first value-added elderberry processing facility in the country of Guatemala. And so that has limited our market research a bit on what we will price the product at to sell. And we'll discuss that in a second. So just like being the first facility, typically the crop is just exported like raw, essentially, from harvest. And so this is giving an opportunity for the local community to make a profit off of this. But like I said, we don't have a lot to base off the price off of because it's never been done before in the country. So another factor influencing the finances is that the client has an existing building that the process facility will be implemented in. So that has saved our costs a good amount because we're not having to acquire land or a building. We're just basically moving into one. So for the costs, the fixed costs are essentially the equipment purchase, which we'll go over the safety of those in a few slides. And then the variable costs are the operating costs of water and electricity, and labor, the wages of the workers. And so comparatively, the fixed costs are definitely the bigger risk. And especially since the system is modular and designed to grow with an increase in production, additional equipment would be needed to be purchased down the line, kind of depending on what would increase the efficiency of the process. So like I said, the selling price is one of the biggest risks in the finance risk as a whole. So we have two scenarios on the screen for different selling prices. And so on the left, we've titled it option 1. And so in our previous economic analysis report, we stated that we would sell roughly producing a gallon a day, we would sell that for $105 a gallon. And this also is in US dollars. And so when it's implemented, it would definitely obviously need to be converted to the Guatemalan currency, but for the purposes of the presentation, we're keeping it in US dollars. And then the daily production of the byproduct would be sold for $18.50 a pound. And so that was based on prices that we found for selling in the US. And with that revenue, the payback period of the investment would be just under 1 month. So for option 2, we kept the same quantities, selling the concentrate for roughly half the price for $57 a gallon, and then the byproduct we would be selling to the local bakeries for roughly a third of the price at $5 a pound. And so that increases our payback period to 12.5 months. So that's just over a year, which really isn't that bad. But you can see how the selling price would impact the payback period as a whole. So I'm going to pass it over to Zach to discuss the next risk.
So the next risk that I'll be covering is physical safety of the employees. What I'll be discussing is how to keep the employees safe in their working environment, specific types of personal protective equipment, and after that, we'll be talking about how to produce a safe product. Next slide, please. So the first risk comes with our mechanical shaker. This uses a small motor to vibrate the machine. And you can see a picture on the right is an example of a mesh. I couldn't get a good image of the mesh type that'll be used in our shaker, but you can see that it's got holes just small enough for the berries to filter through. Since this machine will be moving, um, it becomes a hazard to things such as loose clothing or sticking fingers where they shouldn't belong. So when operating around the machine, to mitigate this risk, we're going to have the employees refrain from wearing loose clothing, and if there is a need to clean it, or say there's a jam or clog and it needs to be cleared, the machine should always be turned off and unplugged specifically for cleaning. Next slide. The second risk comes with the steam juicer. This uses wood fire to heat it up. Obviously, wood fire is hot, so there will be a fire extinguisher within 25 feet of the steam juicer at all times in case anything were to go wrong. It should be clearly visible and should never be obstructed from reach. On top of that, it will not get hot enough to let you know that it is hot, so it should never be handled with bare hands, especially during hours of operation. It should always be handled with some form of heat-resistant gloves. Oven mitts should honestly be stable enough for it. Next slide. And the last one that I'll be covering is a vacuum distiller. This one should always be used with eye protection and closed-toed shoes, since there are a lot of glass products on it, and since it's also creating a pressurized environment. If it were to shatter, glass can go flying at higher rates than just a regular glass hitting the ground. The other thing about this one in particular, since it's our most expensive piece of equipment, we figured only authorized employees should be allowed A, near it, and B, to operate it, seeing as that it is kind of the crown piece of the operation. It's what's costing us the most, so it's our largest investment. The last thing is it should be away from high traffic areas. We want to mitigate as much travel around it as possible so that nobody can accidentally bump into it and knock it over, seeing as a considerable portion of it is incredibly fragile. Now I'll be passing on to Austin to cover product safety.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. So the second part of our overall safety pertains specifically to the safety of our actual product. And the first factor that we've considered for product safety involves contamination. And there's two types of contamination we're planning on preventing. To mitigate contamination from the actual berries, the berries will be washed in a water bath 2 times to ensure that the berries are completely clean before they move to processing. And the water baths that we use to wash the berries will be drained at the end of each day and refilled at the start of each day to ensure that the water and detergent remains effective at cleaning the berries. And to eliminate equipment contamination, we're planning on cleaning and drying all of our equipment at the end of each day so that it is completely clean for the start of the next day, and none of the juice is contaminated from our actual equipment. Next slide. So the second factor we're taking precautions to deal with is toxin removal from the actual elderberries. So most of the toxins present in the elderberries are contained within the leaves and the stems, and for that reason we're using an industrial destemming machine, so we're not taking any risks. In addition to using an industrial destemmer, our workers will also be responsible for manually removing any leaves and stems that make it through the destemming machine. And when our berries will be placed into an additional water bath for separation, our workers will be agitating the mixture to make sure that all the unripe berries float to the top. I have a small example in the picture here. You can see that the unripe berries float to the top. And although we're not relying on our steam juicer to remove contamination and toxins, the temperatures in the steam juicer would kill any bacteria as well as removing any toxins that remain in our actual berries. So in our previous presentations, we were debating the use of 1-gallon buckets versus 5-gallon buckets. And there's several reasons we've decided to use 1-gallon buckets, but for the sake of this presentation, we've decided to use 1-gallon buckets to decrease the size of our batches, just in case if a batch is to be contaminated, we lose a maximum of 1 gallon as opposed to 5 gallons if we were using larger buckets. So as we designed our system, there were several things we considered, but something that we considered very important was our ease of implementation. And we were able to break it down into 4 simple steps, which includes the building preparation, the installation of our equipment, the training of our employees, and the establishing of buyers for our actual product. And Michelle's going to talk specifically about each of these steps.
Yes, so for the building preparation, we will be using an existing building in Guatemala decided by the client. And with this, we won't have to remove any old system because we are installing a completely new system. And then the next thing that goes with building preparation is the water and electricity. We will be using well water, but dependent upon where the water is piped into the building, we may need to create some new adaptations of faucets so that they're in locations that make sense with our process flow. Electricity is also only available in single phase, so we need to make sure that the outlets are appropriate for the machines that we have, and we have only selected machines that work with the electricity available. And the final step of the building prep is cleaning and sanitizing the building so that we can bring in the equipment. And the building prep should only take about 1 day. Next, we'll be installing equipment. The equipment will be installed in a logical processing setup from receiving the berries from harvesting, washing, processing, and packaging. Delivery of the equipment is the longest step, with taking about 3 to 4 weeks. And installation will only take 1 to 2 days just because the equipment is relatively simple. Then we'll have training of employees. Since this process is new, the Guatemalan employees that are hired may not be familiar with the techniques that are being used in the processing facility, so they may be unnatural to them. With training, we'll be able to combat some hazards that they may encounter, as well as we'll be able to abide by government regulations for maintaining a safe work environment for the employees. With training, we'll be highly training 1 facility manager that will oversee the full operation, and they will be trained for maintenance of all of the machines. Training of employees will take about 2 days. And then we'll communicate with buyers. In our process, we said this will take about 2 days, but it can be an ongoing process. As our product is going to boost the Guatemalan economy, we'll be contacting restaurants and hopefully getting a delivery schedule dependent upon production with those restaurants. And then here is an overview of our project schedule. As you can see, the longest part of this schedule is the equipment shipping and getting all of those on time to the new building. This whole process will take about 5 weeks. Next slide. And then for our conclusion, our next steps are to write the final report and develop a poster presentation. And our next meeting is to be determined, as it needs to be scheduled with our client and advisors.
Okay, let's see. We don't have a client on board, do we? Let's go right to Team 8 with your comments, please.
Yeah, so I had a quick question about some of y'all's risks you mentioned. So I don't know if y'all mentioned it, I just missed it, but did you guys mention any like PPE that you would need to use for any of your risks? I know Zach mentioned for the steamer that it'd be hot, so I don't know if there's like some types of gloves or something you would have to wear.
So sorry about that. I was trying to talk kind of quickly because right after I finished, I crashed again. But yes, the steamer I recommended handling with some form of heat-resistant gloves, and then the only other machine that really required personal protective equipment would be the vacuum distiller, which I recommended closed-toed shoes and eye protection for shattering glass.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, Annalie, I really like that question. I mean, yeah, he covered it kind of. you missed it. You admitted that you may have missed it, but it still gave them a chance to emphasize that. So those kind of questions are great. If it was already covered and they get to talk about it again, that's perfectly fine. So y'all keep going.
So you guys mentioned that this is the first type of this facility in Guatemala. I was just wondering if, like, where some of the other facilities in this industry are located, and maybe if that might be associated with some type of risk being in Guatemala compared to where other facilities like this are located.
So you're just wondering, like, could you explain your question? Like, where are the other facilities located? Like, what other countries or?
Right. Yeah. It's just that's what I was interested in, and where some of these other facilities are located.
Yes, I don't have an exact answer for that. I know that our Bain team worked a lot on trying to get their hands on elderberries to, like, simulate this process and, like, get more information on it. And they had a hard time getting them in the US. So I don't think there's any in the US. I wish I had a better answer for that. I apologize.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, another question or two. We have a little time.
What is the process again? I noticed y'all didn't kind of recap it, and if I hadn't already seen this presentation before, like knew from last time, I kind of wouldn't understand like why these risks would be associated.
So the process is essentially the berries will enter the facility, and the first thing that they'll encounter is a water bath to rinse them of all contaminants from the field. This will get rid of bacteria and then physical contaminants such as dirt or fertilizer that may still be attached to them. From there, they'll be dried and moved to. Am I back?
You're back. Yeah.
All right. They'll be dried and moved to a freezer. They'll be frozen for 2 to 3 hours till they're completely solid. From the freezer, they'll move to the mechanical shaker. They're frozen because it helps strengthen the berries' exterior. This keeps them from being crushed during the shaking process. What the shaker does is it removes the berries off of the stems and separates the stems and leaves from the berries so that we're only getting what we need for production, and then the stems and leaves can be discarded. From there, they'll enter a second water bath. This serves two purposes. The first one being that it'll help thaw the berries as they move down the production line. And the second purpose is that it will, the unripe berries actually float to the surface of water, and this will allow us to discard berries that are potentially poisonous. After that water bath, they'll move to a steam juicer, which will heat them just enough to extract the juice from the berries. This where we'll also be able to collect our what's called bagasse, our byproduct for this production. After they are juiced, they move into the vacuum distiller, and the reason we chose a vacuum distiller is because it keeps temperature low enough that it won't actually boil the berries, removing the antioxidant, or sorry, boil the juice, removing the antioxidants from it, which is the main goal of this in the first place. Elderberries are very rich in things like vitamin C and such, and physically boiling them will remove those key qualities. After the vacuum distiller removes the water from the juice and creates a concentrate, they will be moved into single gallon containers and be prepped for shipping.
Okay, thanks, Blaine, for that question. Sorry your team wasn't here for the last presentation, so I realize we're catching you flat-footed, but it's a good explanation, but I think we need to move on with our critique. So I'm going to ask Dr. Castell to come up and address our comments, please.
Okay, good job with organizing your presentation, the distribution of speaking assignments. That was great. Just to address what Blaine asked exactly that question, because I believe, Zach, you should have presented a flow diagram of the process laid out right at the beginning. It happens to us when we're teaching, we know what we're doing, and you gave a great explanation of that process, but that process layout is essential anytime you are talking about food processing line. So that we have helped Blaine understand once you are talking about every unit operation separately. So remember, you're dealing with a system, so a flow diagram with the process layout would have really been great and help us understand what you're doing. So that's what I was missing, and that's why you got that question, even though you answered very well. A reminder, any food processing line, all workers required to wear coats, boots, goggles. So this is an issue with food processing. I like the fact that you address the labor safety and the food safety, which is a key risk for any processing manufacturing. You don't want to have 1 gallon of bucket contaminated with anything and get people sick and so forth. So I like that you address that. I had a question on your process. Where would that 1 gallon bucket of, and I think it's like the concentrate that you're making. I have a hard time remembering, are you making the juice or are you making the concentrate? What is your final product?
Concentrate is our final product.
So where would that be stored? Because you're putting it down in the buckets. Where are they going to be placed? Is it room temperature?
I'm not 100% sure if we need to refrigerate it or if it's shelf stable.
I think it should be.
It's stored frozen.
Okay, it's very frozen. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. It'll be stored chilled.
Freezing storage, and that's important. And that was missing in your descriptions. Okay, that takes care of all the safety issues that I was worried about. One last question I have, Carly, that's just a conceptual question for me. Why is equipment purchasing a financial risk? That you are the one who addressed the financial risk, very nice table with prices, but you said that equipment purchasing is a financial risk. Just explain to me why.
So I just wanted to include that because it was our biggest cost, and so that affects the payback period. Because we've had the debate on our selling price, and we're not really sure where that's going to be. So we just need to make sure that the selling price will take into account purchasing the equipment, because the client is limited on the budget. So we just wanted to be aware of that and keep that in mind.
Okay, great. One last comment. I like the fact that you reduce the price or the concentrate by half. I still think you could address even halving that once more, because I still think $57 per gallon is very expensive for the region. Maybe you can give the client, half and half, go down to $12, and give him those estimates so he can decide what to do afterward. Otherwise, great progress. Remember the processing line laid out. Otherwise, very good. Thank you.
Dr. Castell. Yes, I agree. This was a good presentation. You hit all the basics, and I'll talk about that in a second. 14 minutes, so right on time, very equitably distributed among the 4 of you. This presentation was about risk analysis and mitigation. You had multiple risks that you discussed. They were associated with your solution, which was good. You had a mitigation for each of the risks. That's what we're looking for. So the idea is you're letting your client know, well, here's our solution, but there's going to be a few risks associated with it. But don't be scared, because here's what you can do to reduce the effects of that risk. And so I felt like you did that very well. The implementation plan had 4 steps with a Gantt chart, and I understood that pretty well. We could talk about it. Maybe it could be developed more or something, but you had the basic steps there. So now I'm going to get into some more detailed critique here. Let's start with Austin. You had most of your slides are, go to your slide about the de-stimming, product safety de-stimming, back up one, right? Nope, it had the shiny thing on it. Right there. Okay, so I wrote this down as you were talking about de-stimming. Here's my critique here, okay? I'm really getting down in the weeds here. I'm going to critique you on some minor things, but you have some great pictures here, but you really don't have enough text. And this was kind of common throughout your presentation. You want to have at least some text where the slide can somewhat stand alone. I think when you were talking about here, you were talking about the risk of de-stimming. but I wasn't really following you too well. And so what you can do to help me follow you is to have more of the content of what you're saying here instead of just the topic. Because you've got the topic here. Go back up a slide. Go backwards one. So same sort of thing. The contamination is your topic, but you're not really fleshing it out enough with some more bullets. Maybe some bullets on why contamination, where it is a problem, where it occurs. And then, of course, I would like to see the written mitigation. You addressed it verbally, but if I'm the client, I want to see it. I want to, you want that to be fixed in the client's mind that we have a mitigation plan for each one of these risks. So we're talking about communicating your content. You've got the content, you've done the work, but the goal of this class is to teach you how to communicate it effectively. And so you've got a good looking slide here, but it's a little heavy on the picture and low on content. You understand what I mean?
Yes, sir. I understand what you're saying.
Okay. So I would just say you need more text, more content on each of your slides. And Austin, you personally, you've got a good presentation style, but you need a little bit more energy. You just need to enunciate a little bit more. You tend to kind of plateau there for a while. So I'm just going to critique you on that a little bit. Let's go to Michelle. Let's go to your Gantt chart. That's a pretty nice looking Gantt chart. It's a challenge when you've got a long process. It makes the font small. I get that. But still, there's ultimately, I need to see the bottom line if I'm the client. I appreciate being able to see the detail. But the bottom line, you could just put one big number at the bottom and tell me what is the time to implement this solution.
It was about 35 days total. 35
days. Okay, so that's an important number. I mean, you want to tell the client the bottom line. And so, maybe put it right here. And I'm going to ask you, really, none of these can be done sequentially? Why can't I order the equipment? Why shouldn't I do that first? And then while I'm waiting for it to be delivered, I could do my building prep and even do some training.
I think theoretically you could, but we decided to do it this way. Maybe we do need to work on that.
That's all right. Okay. Well, that was your decision, but I'm just saying, if I'm the client, I'm going to want to get my installation done as quickly as possible. And lastly, let's go back to Carly's two tables on looking at the financial risk. Those were good. I like the way they are. You've got the item, the quantity, the unit price, and the totals over there. But this is per day. But you're talking about a payback period in months. And so it started to generate some questions. And I realize these questions kind of go back to the economic analysis. But how many months are you? I'm looking for an annual amount. So I feel like your units were good basically, but somewhere at the end, I need to see how much are we raking? What's our revenue, our annual revenue, and then I want to see that balanced against that very risky, high dollar equipment cost that you're concerned about. And so you're telling a good story. A payback period of less than a year is still awesome. Any client would probably go, yeah, let's do that. But it was relying a little too much on you talking about it, and you didn't display it as well as maybe you could have there. So again, these are minor critiques, and I'm out of time, but it was a good presentation.